They say time heals all wounds, but whoever said that never had to carry the kind of scars that scream in silence. The kind you hide under long sleeves and practiced smiles. The kind no medicine can touch. I'm Diane White. I live in Bar Harbor, Maine, where the ocean crashes into the cliffs like it's trying to remember something it lost. I'm 77 years old now. Folks around here call me Granny Diane the herbalist. I've spent most of my life coaxing healing from wild plants, linden blossoms for stress, comfrey for bruises, rose hips for aching joints. But there are some hurts too deep for any tea or poultice. That kind of hurt. It comes from betrayal, from what happens when the one meant to protect you becomes the one you fear most, and from what you have to become to survive it. This isn't an easy story to tell, but I believe someone out there might need it. Maybe a girl who thinks no one will believe her. Maybe a mother who suspects but is too afraid to see. Or maybe just someone like me, who's lived too long with pain she didn't cause. Let me take you back to 1961. I was 15. My little sister Emily had just turned 7. Back then, we lived in a tiny wooden house near the edge of town, not far from the harbor. Our mother, Helen, worked herself near to death cleaning houses for the summer people, wealthy families who came up from Boston or New York to spend their warm months in coastal mansions with wraparound porches and white wicker chairs. My father had died 2 years earlier. A machine at the shoe factory malfunctioned and crushed him before he could even cry out. He was buried before winter hit. After that, our house got colder, not just in temperature, but in spirit. Still, we got by. We didn't have much 2 bedrooms, a living room that doubled as a kitchen, and a creaky bathroom out back, but Mama kept it spotless. Poverty is no excuse for filth, she'd say, scrubbing until her knuckles cracked. A clean house is dignity. I became Emily's second mother. I'd wake her every morning, braid her long honey blonde hair, walk her to school, and then hurry back to mop the floor, hang laundry, finish my homework before Mama came home at dusk. Emily was my joy. Her eyes were like sea glass, soft green and full of wonder. She made up songs about clouds, told stories to ants, and danced barefoot in puddles. She was the light of that house, the reason I kept going. Then one Friday afternoon, everything began to change. I came home from the corner store with a sack of dried beans and a wildflower I'd picked for Mama. But when I stepped inside, I froze. There was a man sitting in our living room, sipping coffee like he belonged there, even from the doorway. I felt the air shift thick and wrong. He was big, broad shoulders, grease under his fingernails, a mustache that twitched when he smiled, but the smile never reached his eyes. Mama looked, flushed, not from work, but from something else. Something I hadn't seen since before Daddy died. Diane, this is Mr. Frank Dobbins, she said, smoothing her apron. He's a truck driver, rents a room from Mrs. Calhoun up the road. He stood and reached out to shake my hand. Pleased to meet the young lady of the house, he said, eyes raking me like I was a piece of meat in a butcher's window. I shook his hand out of politeness, but my whole body screamed not to. That was the first time I saw Frank Dobbins. It wasn't the last. When Emily came running in from playing next door, she stopped dead in the doorway. Her little fingers clutched my skirt. She didn't like strangers, and I didn't blame her. Frank grinned down at her, kneeling just a little too close. And this must be Emily, he said. Your Mama talks about you all the time. Emily didn't answer. She just pressed herself into me. Mama chuckled nervously. Don't be rude, sweetheart. Say hello to Mr. Frank. "Hello," Emily whispered, never lifting her gaze. From that day on, Frank began showing up more often. He'd bring Mama small things, wildflowers, jars of local honey, a cheap scarf from a roadside stand. Within a month, he was walking her home from the bus stop. Within 3, he'd moved into our home. Mama was beaming. She called it a second chance. But in my gut, I knew Frank Dobbins wasn't a blessing. He was the storm we never saw coming. Looking back, I believe grief left cracks in Mama's spirit that Frank Dobbins slithered into. When my daddy, Warren White, died in the fall of 1959, something in Mama went quiet. It wasn't just the absence of his voice echoing down the hall or his boots by the door. It was the way the air changed. He'd always brought warmth with him, big, calloused hands that built our chicken coop, held Emily up to the moonlight like she was stardust. He made our tiny home feel full, even when our pantry was bare. He was working the late shift at a shoe factory on the outskirts of town. The press machine malfunctioned. It crushed him in seconds. There wasn't even time for goodbyes. He was gone before the ambulance left the lot. Mama didn't cry much, at least not in front of us, but I heard her some nights in the kitchen, pressing her face into a towel so Emily wouldn't hear. She worked herself to the bone-cleaning houses for the summer folk 5 days a week, 10 hours a day. She'd leave before sunrise and come home when it was already dark, her clothes heavy with the scent of bleach and lemon oil. I tried to step up. I made Emily's school lunches, helped her with spelling, cooked supper as best I could. Sometimes we only had potatoes and onions, but I made them into something that smelled like love. Mama always thanked me, though her voice sounded far away. We were a small family of women, holding on the best we could. So when Frank came along, I suppose I understood why Mama wanted to believe he was good. He was charming, in that slick, easy way some men have. He'd crack jokes at the dinner table and compliment Mama's cooking like he'd never tasted meatloaf before. He fixed the back fence without being asked, even offered to patch the roof with tar from the hardware store. You see, Mama told me one night while we washed dishes together, he's not like the others. Frank is kind, reliable. I didn't say much, just kept my hands in the suds, because here's what I noticed. Frank never touched Mama's hand when he laughed. He never looked at her when he brought those wildflowers or jars of jam. He looked at Emily, and sometimes he looked at me. It was subtle at first, just a flick of the eye, a lingering gaze. But my body reacted before my mind could. I felt it in my stomach, tight and sour, like I was holding a secret even I didn't understand yet. When I told Mama I felt uneasy, she brushed it off with a soft sigh. You always were your father's daughter, she said, suspicious of everything. She didn't mean it unkindly, but she didn't listen either. Frank began to stay the night more often. At first, he'd sleep on the pull-out sofa in the front room. But soon, the door to Mama's bedroom was closed by 9 p.m., and the mornings smelled like strong coffee and his cologne cheap and heavy, the kind that clung to the curtains. 3 months after that first coffee visit, he officially moved in. Mama was radiant. She started humming while she cooked again, wearing her hair in that twist Daddy used to love. I tried. I really did. I told myself maybe I was being overprotective. Maybe it was jealousy, resentment over sharing Mama's time, her laughter, her attention. Frank even brought little gifts for Emily, a plastic hairbrush with pink rhinestones, a coloring book from a truck stop in New Hampshire. For me, a bar of chocolate now and then, a postcard from Boston, just enough to make me feel silly for doubting. but doubt doesn't need proof to grow. It just needs silence. Frank still gave me that feeling, like a cold hand pressed against the back of my neck. He'd walk into the room, and the light seemed to dim. He never raised his voice, but there was something in the way he looked at people that made you sit straighter. And then there were the rules. He wanted dinner hot and ready by 6:30 sharp. He wanted his work shirts ironed the right way, which changed daily. He hated when Emily laughed too loudly, said it made his head hurt. In this house, I'm the man, he'd say, pounding his chest like a silverback gorilla. And a man deserves respect. One night, he came home late from a delivery run, reeking of whiskey, slamming the front door. Mama had already gone to bed. "Where's my supper?" he demanded, as though it was my job to wait up for him. I pointed to the plate we'd saved in the icebox. "Heat it up yourself," I said, trying to sound calm. His eyes narrowed. That's no way to speak to the man of the house. From the doorway, Emily watched with wide eyes, clutching her rag doll. I felt it again then, that sick, crawling dread. I began to realize something terrible. This man wasn't just mean. He was dangerous. The fall after Frank moved in came early that year. The wind from Frenchman Bay cut through the walls like knives, and no matter how high we stoked the wood stove, the cold always found a way inside. Just like Frank. He was different when Mama wasn't home. It was like watching a man shed his skin. When she was around, he played the doting partner, always offering to take out the trash or rub her feet after work. But the second her footsteps disappeared down the road toward the bus stop, he'd change, not with yelling, not yet, but with what I can only describe as erosion. Bit by bit, he chipped away at our peace. At first, it was the little things. He started criticizing how I cooked too salty, not hot enough, not what a real man eats. Then he moved to my chores. He'd run his finger along the mantel and show me the dust like he was a school teacher and I'd failed a test. "You're not doing your job around here." He'd growl. "Your mama works hard. Least you could do is keep the place decent." I bit my tongue more times than I can count, for Mama's sake, for Emily's. But it wasn't me I worried about. It was my sister. I began to notice the way Frank found excuses to be near her. He'd offer to help her with her baths, even though Emily had bathed herself since she was 5. He'd brush her hair too long, his hands lingering in places that made her stiffen. And he always called her princess in a voice that made my skin crawl. She started to change, too. My little Emily, who once sang to the sparrows and painted clouds with her fingers, became quiet. She flinched when someone touched her shoulder. She stopped humming, stopped drawing, stopped sleeping through the night. One morning, I caught her staring at the wall, her doll clutched tight against her chest. "What's wrong, Em?" I asked, kneeling beside her. She didn't answer, just shook her head and bit her lip. I knew what was happening, but I didn't have proof. And I didn't know how to stop it without making things worse. There were times I'd catch Frank watching her from the hallway, his head slightly tilted like he was studying prey. The look in his eyes, it wasn't paternal. It wasn't protective. It was possession. One night, after he'd been drinking, he burst into the kitchen just after 11. "Where's my dinner?" "Girl," he barked, staggering slightly. "It's in the icebox," I said, keeping my voice even. "You can warm it up on the stove." He slammed his hand on the counter so hard the salt shaker toppled over. "I work all day while you sit on your behind. And I come home to cold leftovers like some mutt." I took a step back, hands trembling. It's past 11. Frank. We waited. Mama's asleep. I don't talk back to me. Just then, Emily appeared in the hallway, rubbing her eyes. "What's going on?" she asked. Voice small. Frank turned and smiled that wolfish grin. "The princess is awake," he said, voice suddenly syrupy. "Come give your stepdaddy a hug. I brought you something." She looked at me, her eyes wide. "Go back to bed." I said quickly, "I'll tuck you in soon." Frank's gaze lingered on her as she slowly backed away. Then he turned back to me. "She's a sweet one," he muttered, "but she needs discipline. You both do." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat up in bed, clutching the old broom like it was a spear. I listened for every creak, every shift of floorboards. Frank didn't try anything, but that didn't mean he wouldn't. From that night forward, I never let Emily out of my sight. She went where I went to the outhouse, the garden, the wash line. We even shared a bed, just like we had when she was a baby. I kept one arm around her and the other pointed toward the door. But the tension only made Frank angrier. His punishments grew crueler. If dinner wasn't perfect, he'd throw the plate across the room. If Emily spilled milk, he'd call her stupid. If I rolled my eyes, he'd grab my arm too tight and whisper things only a monster would say. "You're asking for it, you know. Keep interfering, and you'll end up worse than your daddy." I didn't know what he meant by that, but the way he said it made the blood drain from my face. He never hit us in front of Mama, never raised his voice when she was home. To her, he was still the man who paid the bills and kissed her cheek after dinner. She was happier than she'd been in years, and I couldn't bring myself to destroy that until I realized I'd have no choice. One Thursday afternoon, 3 months after Frank moved in, I was outside scrubbing the laundry in the wash basin when I heard a thud from inside, then another. I dropped the washboard, heart pounding, and ran. The door to Emily's room was ajar. What I saw turned my stomach inside out. Frank was crouched over Emily, one hand over her mouth, the other I can't even say it. Emily's eyes were wide with terror, silent tears pouring down her face. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I acted. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a ceramic jug from the hallway table, and brought it down on Frank's back with every ounce of strength I had. "Get away from her," I screamed, my voice unrecognizable. He roared in pain and turned, fists clenched, face red. "What the hell do you think you're doing? You little witch." I stepped in front of Emily, shielding her with my body. "If you ever touch her again," I said, trembling with fury, "I'll kill you in your sleep. That's a promise." And for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Just a flicker, but it was enough to keep me standing. Frank didn't say a word after I hit him that day. Not right away. He stared at me like a wolf sizing up another predator, one hand rubbing the sore spot on his back, the other twitching like he wanted to strike. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he straightened his shirt, fixed his belt, and smoothed back his thinning hair like nothing had happened. Then he leaned in so close I could smell his whiskey-laced breath and said in a low, trembling voice, "You made a big mistake." I stood my ground, though my knees were about to give out. "So did you." He didn't argue. He just walked past me like I was dust and disappeared into the kitchen. A few minutes later, I heard the screen door slam. Emily and I stayed frozen in that bedroom, wrapped in silence thick enough to choke on. Once the sound of his truck engine faded into the distance, Emily collapsed into my arms. She shook so hard I thought she might vanish. "He hurt you, Diane," she sobbed. "He said if I told anyone, he'd hurt you. And Mama." My throat felt like it had been lined with glass. I pulled her tighter. "Since when, baby?" I asked, already dreading the answer. She whispered so quietly I had to lean in. "Since the week he moved in. When you'd go get water or when you were outside, he'd come in. That was when the rage hit me, not loud and explosive like fire, but slow and boiling like tar. I wanted to end him, right there, grab the hatchet from the woodpile and make him disappear into the earth. But I couldn't afford rage. Not then, not when the stakes were Emily's life. And maybe mine, too. I had to be smart. So I did the only thing I could think of. I started keeping a record. A notebook Mama had given me for school, the kind with a spiral spine and wide blue lines. Every time Frank said something, every time he grabbed my arm, every bruise I got, I wrote it down. Date, time, what was said, where it happened. I started calling it the Truth Book. I hid it under my mattress. If he found it, I didn't know what he'd do, but I knew I needed it. Because deep down, I knew the time was coming when we'd need to prove the truth to someone other than ourselves. Mama didn't notice at first, or maybe she chose not to. She had her reasons. She was less tired these days, now that Frank was helping pay for things. We had meat more often, new curtains, even a second-hand heater for the front room. I saw her humming again while she brushed her hair at night, and I hated myself for the bitterness I felt. I didn't want to destroy her little pocket of peace, but I also couldn't pretend anymore. Not when Emily started crying in her sleep, not when she flinched every time a man walked by on the sidewalk. One afternoon, when I was folding laundry at the table, Mama glanced over and said, "Emily's not herself lately. She's scared." I answered, cautious. Mama frowned. Of what before I could answer? We heard the truck door slam out front. Frank was home 2 days earlier than expected. Mama smiled and straightened her apron. He must have finished his route early. I didn't smile. That night, as I was doing dishes, Frank slipped in behind me so close I could feel the heat off his skin. "Your mama's been saying things," he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. "Told me you've been filling her head with lies." I kept my eyes on the soap bubbles, heart racing. "You know what happens to girls who make up stories," he hissed. "They disappear." I turned slowly and faced him, holding a dripping plate like a shield. "I'm just protecting my sister. You should try it sometime." He sneered. "You think anyone's going to believe you over me? Your mama already made her choice. She wants this house. She wants comfort. And I'm the one who provides it." He pointed a finger in my face. "You keep this up, and you'll see what real suffering looks like." That night, I tucked Emily into bed and watched her sleep like a guard dog. My body ached from exhaustion, but I didn't dare let my eyes close. The next morning, I tried to talk to Mama again. She was at the stove, frying eggs, her shoulders tense. "Mama," I said, voice trembling, "I need to tell you something about Frank." She didn't turn around. "I'm already late for work. It's serious." She sighed, setting the spatula down. "What now?" I told her everything, as much as I could. I left out the worst parts maybe to protect her, maybe to protect Emily, but I didn't sugarcoat it. She sat down slowly at the kitchen table, face pale, eyes flicking from side to side like she was searching for a way out that didn't exist. "Are you sure?" "Diane," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I saw it with my own eyes. I replied, "He's hurting her." For a moment, I thought she believed me, and then I saw the fear return. "I thought it was just me," she whispered. "I thought I could handle it." I blinked. "You mean—" "He's hurt you too," She nodded, ashamed. He drinks and says things, grabs my wrists, threatens me if I ever leave. My heart broke again. But I'm scared, Mama said, eyes watering. If he finds out, I believe you. If he knows I want him gone, what if he really does something? I wanted to shake her. I wanted to scream, but instead, I reached across the table and took her hand. Then let me be the one. I said, let me find help. Mama didn't answer, but she didn't stop me either. That was the day I decided to speak to someone with power, someone outside our broken house. And for the first time, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, we weren't as alone as we felt. Finding help in a town like Bar Harbor back in the early 60s wasn't easy, especially when the danger was inside your own home. Back then, we didn't have hotlines or women's shelters. Abuse wasn't something folks talked about. It was whispered behind closed doors, brushed under rugs, drowned in casseroles at church picnics. You didn't tell the neighbors. You didn't shame the family name. You just endured. But I wasn't going to endure, not anymore. So I started looking for someone, anyone, who might believe me. Not just believe, but help. And that's when I started paying closer attention to Mr. Walter Briggs. He lived on the corner, 2 houses down from ours. Always neat, always quiet. He had a collie named Jasper and a front porch swing that barely squeaked. I knew him by sight, everyone did. But I'd never actually spoken to him. One day, Emily and I were walking back from the general store with a sack of flour and some soup cans when I saw him standing in line ahead of us. He was buying a tin of coffee and a loaf of bread. His uniform was pressed, hat tucked under one arm. I don't know what gave me the courage. Maybe it was Emily's tiny hand gripping mine like she was drowning. Maybe it was the bruise on my forearm still throbbing under my sweater. "Good morning, Mr. Briggs," I said as casually as I could. He turned, surprised. His face softened when he saw Emily. "Good morning. You're Helen's girls, aren't you?" "Yes, sir. I'm Diane. This is my sister, Emily." He nodded politely, eyes kind but serious. "I've seen you walking to school, always together." He looked at Emily, not like Frank did. There was no weight in his gaze, no hunger, just kindness. "You a teacher?" he asked me. "Not yet," I said, "but I'd like to be." He smiled. Bar Harbor could use more good teachers. I hesitated, then blurted, "You work with the police, right?" That got his attention. He tilted his head slightly. "I do. Why do you ask?" My heart was beating so loud I could barely hear myself. "Just curious," I mumbled. He studied me for a long second, not unkindly. "Well, if you ever need anything," he said, "you know where I live. Yellow house on the corner. Porch lights always on." Those words lit something inside me, a flicker of hope I hadn't felt in months. But hope is a dangerous thing when you live with a man like Frank Dobbins. When we got home that afternoon, Frank's truck was already in the driveway. Emily's hand tightened around mine. "He's early," she whispered. I squeezed back. "We'll be quick. Just go straight to your room." As we walked through the front door, Frank was sitting at the table, a bottle of beer in front of him. His eyes locked on me, hard. "Where were you?" he asked, voice low and steady. "Grocery store," I said, holding up the bag. "Mama asked us to get sugar and flour. I saw you talking to that cop." My blood turned to ice. So he'd followed us, watched us. We just said hello. I lied. He's our neighbor. Frank stood slowly, taking a swig from the bottle. I don't like people poking around in my business. I said nothing. You think you're smart? He said, stepping closer. Think you're going to run to some badge and tell stories I didn't blink. I didn't say anything. He stared at me for a moment, then laughed low and nasty. You better not, because if you do, you won't like what happens next. That night, after everyone went to bed, I retrieved my notebook from under the mattress and added a new entry. Frank followed us today, threatened me for talking to Officer Briggs, said I won't like what happens next. 6:15 p.m., Tuesday, October 17th, 1961. I was done waiting for Mama to find her courage. I had to find my own. The next week, I passed by Officer Briggs's house on purpose twice. The second time, he was watering his porch flowers. I paused at the gate, Emily clutching my side. I need to talk to you, I said softly. Not here, not now, but soon. He gave me a nod. No questions, just trust. Tomorrow, he said, after school. My porch. No one will bother you here. I nodded and kept walking. That night, Frank was in a foul mood. Nothing pleased him. Not the stew, not the folded laundry, not even the silence. At dinner, he slammed his fist on the table so hard Emily dropped her spoon. I work all day to come home to this, he growled. A lazy girl and a little mute mouse. Mama looked tired. Her eyes pleaded with me not to engage. So I didn't. But I didn't cower either. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay beside Emily, watching the door, broomstick beside the bed. When the floor creaked just after midnight, I sat up like a shot. Frank was standing in the hallway. I just wanted to say goodnight to the little one. He slurred. She's asleep, I said, gripping the broom. Say goodnight and move along. He smiled like a man daring me to stop him, but he didn't step forward. Careful, Diane, he said, voice slow. One day you'll let your guard down. Maybe, I said, but it won't be tonight. He turned and walked away, but the threat hung in the air like gunpowder. The next day, I went to see Officer Briggs. I brought my notebook, and everything changed. Officer Walter Briggs didn't ask me to sit. When I got to his porch, he just motioned to the rocking chair across from his and poured me a glass of lemonade. It was a clear autumn afternoon, the kind where the maple trees glowed like fire and the air smelled like applewood smoke, but I couldn't enjoy any of it. My hands shook so hard I nearly spilled the notebook I brought with me. Emily sat close to my side, silent as ever. I'd promised her she wouldn't have to talk. She trusted me on that, and I was going to keep that promise. I didn't know who else to go to. I began, placing the notebook gently in my lap. But I think you're the only person who might believe me and actually be able to do something. Walter didn't speak. He nodded for me to go on. That quiet patience of his, like a warm quilt on a cold morning. I told him everything. Not every detail. Lord knows some things are too heavy to say aloud, but I gave him enough to see the shape of what was happening, the bruises, the threats, the looks Frank gave Emily. The night I caught him in her room, I handed him the notebook. He took it slowly, like it was made of glass, and began to read, page after page, date after date. Quiet notes in my handwriting about screams in the night, Emily's drawings of sad girls in dark houses, how Frank would only hit me where Mama couldn't see. He didn't interrupt once. When he was done, he closed the notebook carefully and looked up. I believe you, he said. I felt a crack in my chest, like something that had been bound tight for too long had finally snapped open. Thank you, I whispered. But, he said, we need more. We need enough to make it stick, enough so no judge, no sheriff, no nosy neighbor can question what's been done to you and your sister. I nodded. I'll do whatever it takes. He glanced at Emily. Does she have to testify? I don't want her to. I said quickly. She's been through enough. Walter nodded. We'll try to avoid it. But I'll need your mother to speak up. And soon. That was the part I dreaded. Mama wasn't ready. That evening, I came home to a quiet house. Too quiet. The kitchen smelled like fried chicken and overcooked peas, the kind of meal Mama made when she was trying too hard. She stood at the stove, her back stiff, eyes glued to the bubbling pot. Frank sat at the table, beer in hand, watching the doorway like he'd been waiting. I knew the moment I stepped inside that he knew. You were out late, he said. Voice calm, almost pleasant. I ignored him and set the grocery bag on the counter. Emily scurried to her room. Store was busy. I lied. Frank stood slowly and walked toward me. I saw you with Briggs. Mama flinched at the name. Frank leaned in close. Did you tell him stories? Diane. I told him the truth. I said, louder than I meant to. His smile dropped. The hell you did. He grabbed my arm hard enough to leave a bruise by morning and dragged me toward the pantry door. Mama rushed over. Frank, let her go. He turned on her so fast, she stumbled backward. You stay out of this. Helen, your daughter's trying to destroy this family. No, Mama said, and her voice shook, but she didn't back away. You destroyed this family the day you laid a hand on my girls. Frank's face turned crimson. He raised his arm. But this time, I was ready. I didn't think. I just moved. I grabbed the cast iron skillet off the stove and slammed it into the side of his shoulder. He roared, stumbled, and turned on me like a wounded animal. You little. But before he could finish, someone pounded on the door. Bar Harbor Police. It was Officer Briggs. Everything after that felt like a blur. The door flying open, Walter stepping into the room, gun still holstered, but hand resting on it, his voice calm but commanding. Mama standing between Frank and me, shielding us with her small body. Frank didn't fight, not with Walter standing there. He tried to talk his way out, said it was all a misunderstanding, that we were hysterical girls, prone to drama. He smiled and offered Walter a beer, blood still seeping from the scratch above his eyebrow. But Walter had already read my notebook, already seen the bruises, already heard enough. You're coming with me, he said. We'll sort it out downtown. Mama and I stood on the porch, watching Frank being led into the cruiser. His eyes found mine, cold, empty. You'll regret this, he mouthed. I didn't look away, because for the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I felt strong. Emily peeked out from behind the screen door. Is he gone? She asked. I nodded. He's gone. Mama let out a long breath and leaned her head on my shoulder. Thank you, she whispered, for not giving up. And that night, for the first time in what felt like forever, we slept with the doors unlocked. The morning after Frank's arrest, Bar Harbor felt different. The fog off the harbor rolled in the same as it always did, but somehow it didn't settle in my chest like it used to. It felt like I could finally breathe without checking over my shoulder, like the air had been scrubbed clean. But freedom, I quickly learned, doesn't mean peace, not right away. There were questions, so many questions, from the police, from neighbors, from Mama's boss, who'd heard whispers before we even spoke a word. Officer Briggs came back that morning, this time not in uniform, but with the same steady hands and the same kind eyes. He brought hot cocoa for Emily and a notepad for me. He sat with Mama at the kitchen table, explaining everything, the legal process, the next steps, how we'd likely have to testify, how nothing would move quickly, and how we needed to be prepared for Frank to deny everything. But Walter also brought reassurance. "We believe you," he said, "and we're not going anywhere." Those words meant more than I could say. That week was a blur of interviews and medical visits. Emily was examined by a nurse from Bangor who specialized in child trauma. I stayed in the room the whole time, holding her hand while she stared at the ceiling and didn't say a word. Mama cried after, not loud, just silent, steady tears that soaked the front of her apron. It wasn't just grief, it was guilt. "I let him into our home," she whispered one night as we sat on the porch. "I thought I was giving us a second chance. Instead, I brought a monster into your lives. You didn't know," I said softly. "I should have," she replied. "A mother should know." I looked at her hands red, cracked from years of bleach and scrubbing, trembling as they folded into her lap. "You're not the only one who carries blame," I said. "We all got hurt, but we're still here. That's what matters." A few days later, Walter returned, not alone this time. With him was a tall, elegant woman in her 60s, with gray streaks in her hair and eyes sharp as needles but warm like soup. "This is Mrs. Lorraine Adams," Walter said. "She runs a support center in Ellsworth. Thought maybe you could use someone who's been through the storm herself." Lorraine reached out and took Mama's hand. "I know you don't feel strong right now," she said gently, "but you're already braver than most." At first, Mama resisted. She said she didn't need to relive it. She said what was done, but Lorraine didn't push. She just gave Mama her card and a knowing smile. "When you're ready, I'll be there." Later that week, it was Emily's turn to meet someone new. Dr. Susan Bell, a young psychologist from Bangor, soft-spoken with round glasses and a voice like melted butter. She came to our house on a Saturday morning, sat on the rug beside Emily, and played with a set of paper dolls for 30 minutes before saying a single word about therapy. It worked. By the end of the hour, Emily had whispered something about the bad dreams. That was enough. She doesn't have to talk about what happened until she's ready. Dr. Bell told us. Right now, we focus on making her feel safe. It was the first time I saw a real glimmer of light in Emily's eyes, like something inside her believed healing was possible. As for me, I didn't think I needed help. I wasn't the one who had been touched or scarred in the obvious ways. But Dr. Bell saw through me. "You've been the anchor," she said after one session. "But anchors rust, too." I didn't say anything, just nodded, pretending I didn't feel the exhaustion in my bones. That night, Walter dropped off a casserole, said it was from his sister. "I hope you're not tired of shepherd's pie," he joked. "I'm tired of a lot of things," I said with a half smile, but not kindness. He lingered a moment before heading back to his car. "You know, Diane, the fact that you spoke up, that you documented everything you might have saved more than just your sister." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "Let's just say this isn't Frank's first time. There are whispers from his past, things we're starting to look into now." A chill ran through me. Not fear, something colder. So it wasn't just Emily. He'd done this before, maybe many times. that night. I added one more entry to my notebook. He had others. We weren't the first. Maybe we'll be the last. Maybe this book will be the reason someone else doesn't have to grow up broken. By the end of the month, we received notice that Frank had been officially charged with multiple counts of child endangerment and abuse. His lawyer tried to paint us as hysterical, said we were lying for attention, said we were poor and angry and looking for someone to blame. But we had more than stories. We had bruises. We had medical reports. We had the notebook. And most importantly, we had each other. Mama started attending Lorraine's Wednesday night group. Emily began drawing again. And I started believing that maybe, just maybe, survival could become something more. The courthouse in Ellsworth was a pale, boxy building that smelled like floor polish and stale air. I remember walking in that morning feeling like I'd swallowed a stone. Not fear, at least. Not only fear, it was more like the weight of history pressing down on my chest. It had been nearly 6 months since Frank had been arrested. 6 months of therapy sessions, of support group meetings, of quietly, slowly reclaiming our lives. 6 months of nightmares that still came and of tiny victories that made them bearable. And now, it was time to speak the truth out loud. Mama sat on one side of me in the courtroom, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Emily was not required to testify, thank God. Dr. Bell had made it clear making her relive everything might do more harm than good. The judge agreed, but I had to testify. So did Mama. When they called my name, I stood up on legs that barely felt real. I took the stand. The prosecutor asked me to explain what happened. I started with the day Frank moved in, then the small things, the looks, the changes in Emily, the night I caught him in her room, my notebook. I tried to speak evenly, clearly, but my voice shook when I got to the part about Emily, what I saw, the way he covered her mouth, the way she looked at me like I was her last hope. The defense attorney tried to twist my words. "Isn't it true," he asked, pacing in front of the jury box, "that you disliked Mr. Dobbins from the start?" "Yes," I said, because something in me knew what he was. Turns out I was right. He didn't like that answer. "Isn't it true you wrote things in that notebook after the fact to make it seem worse than it was?" "No," I said. "I wrote them while they were happening. Every bruise, every threat, every night I didn't sleep. He tried to shake me. He couldn't. When Mama took the stand, I saw something I hadn't seen in her before. Not shame, not fear, rage. She looked that lawyer in the eye and told him I was weak. I let a man manipulate me because I was tired and alone. But my daughter wasn't weak. She saw what I refused to see. She saved her sister. And she saved me." Frank didn't look at us once. He just stared straight ahead, stone-faced, like the outcome didn't matter. But it did. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like breathing again after being underwater for too long. Frank was sentenced to 8 years in prison. The courtroom murmured when they heard it. Some said it wasn't enough. Maybe it wasn't, but to us, it meant safety. It meant Emily could sleep without the hallway light on. It meant Mama could go to work without watching the clock every minute. It meant I could start imagining a life beyond survival. Outside the courthouse, Walter Briggs waited for us with the engine running. He didn't say anything when we climbed into the car. He just looked at me in the rearview mirror and nodded once, like he knew, like he'd been there too, somehow. When we got home that night, I tucked Emily into bed the same way I had 100 times before. She looked up at me with those green eyes of hers and said, "It's really over, isn't it?" I hesitated, then nodded. "For now, baby. And we'll be ready if it ever tries to come back." She wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered, "You were my hero." I cried in the hallway that night, silently, the way Mama used to after Daddy died. But this time, the tears didn't come from helplessness. They came from release, from the ache of holding everything inside for too long. The next morning, the sun poured through the window like it hadn't in years. Not just light, but warmth. We were still bruised, still healing, but we were finally free to begin again. After the trial, we didn't move right away. It wasn't that easy. Bar Harbor was still home, still full of memories, some too painful to look at, and others too precious to leave behind. But bit by bit, our house changed. Mama replaced the curtains in the living room, the ones Frank had once pulled down during a drunken rage. She painted the kitchen cabinets a soft yellow. Emily helped her hang a new wind chime on the back porch. And I enrolled in the teacher's college over in Bangor. It was part-time and took longer than it should have, but I did it. I took the bus in on Tuesdays and Thursdays and worked at the general store on weekends. I studied late at night while Emily slept beside me. Her hand often curled around mine, like she never quite stopped needing that anchor. Mama started volunteering at the Women's Center in Ellsworth. At first, just small things, filing, answering phones. But eventually, she started speaking, telling her story, not for pity, but for power. The other women listened. Some cried. Some finally spoke up for the first time. She's strong now. Lorraine told me one day. It took time, but she's found her voice. Emily flourished in therapy with Dr. Bell. Slowly, she began to talk more, then laugh. She took to drawing again, but now her pictures were full of sunlight and gardens and animals, not just the shadows of our past. One Sunday afternoon, about a year after the trial, Walter Briggs showed up on our porch with a stack of lumber in his truck. "What's all this?" I asked, stepping out with a pitcher of iced tea. He tapped the edge of the truck bed. "You said once you wanted a reading nook for Emily. Thought we could build one off the sunroom. I've got the tools. You've got the tea." It became our weekend project, and not just a nook. It turned into a small library, a quiet place for Emily to read and for me to write. Because, yes, I had started writing again. Not just in notebooks, but essays, letters, eventually even articles, stories about survival, about protection, about how silence can destroy, but truth can heal. Lorraine asked me to speak once at a community event in Bangor. I stood on a stage with trembling hands, looking out at a sea of women mothers, daughters, sisters, many of whom carried their own secret stories. I told them about the notebook, about the bruise on my sister's wrist that nobody asked about how the man who hurt her almost got away with it, but didn't, because we spoke, because we refused to let shame be louder than truth. After that night, a local nonprofit reached out. They wanted to sponsor a writing program for girls in small towns who didn't have access to counselors or support groups. They asked if I would help lead it. I said yes. That was how Helen's Haven began, named after Mama, whose quiet courage had taught me more than any textbook ever could. We set it up in an old farmhouse just outside of Ellsworth. By the end of the first year, we had over 50 girls writing, speaking, learning to name what had been done to them, and most importantly, to believe it wasn't their fault. Emily grew up with the program, first as a student, then as a mentor. She had a gift for listening, for sitting in silence with someone until they felt safe enough to speak. Mama became our house mother. Lorraine joined the board. Walter stopped by twice a week with tools, advice, and sometimes warm apple pie. As for me, I never left. I found my calling in those halls, not just as a teacher, but as someone who'd walked through fire and came out carrying water for the next girl who'd need it. Because healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means making something beautiful out of what tried to break you. And by the time I turned 77, I looked around Helen's Haven and saw a legacy, not built from blood or money, but from courage, scars, and sisterhood. And I knew we had won. At 77, my hands are a little slower, my back a little stiffer, and the winter winds bite harder than they used to here in Bar Harbor. But every morning, I wake to the sound of girls' laughter echoing from the main hall of Helen's Haven, and I smile. Emily is grown now. She teaches art therapy in our after-school program. She married a gentleman named Chris who builds boats and never raises his voice. Sometimes I catch her watching the younger girls with a quiet look in her eyes, like she sees pieces of her past and wants to hold them safe. Mama passed 3 years ago, peacefully, in her sleep. She spent her final days tending to the garden outside the Haven, humming old songs and sipping sweet tea with Lorraine by her side. I planted lilies near her window afterward, her favorite flower. They bloom every spring, a soft reminder that healing can take root in the hardest ground. Walter retired from the force not long after the program expanded, but he still visits every Friday with fresh pie and the same kind eyes that once believed a trembling girl holding a notebook full of truth. He never liked the spotlight, but I credit him with changing the course of our lives. And me, I spend my days in the upstairs office, surrounded by stacks of journals, letters, drawings from the girls who've come through our doors. Some of them still send postcards years later from college, from new homes, from lives they never thought they'd get to live. Sometimes they call me Miss Diane, sometimes just Granny D. They all call me safe. It's a strange thing how the worst season of your life can plant the seeds for your greatest purpose. I didn't grow up wanting to start a center for girls. I didn't dream of courtrooms or therapy or being brave. I just wanted to protect my sister. But that one act, the decision to speak, to believe my instincts, to write it all down and hand it over, was the hinge that turned the door. And through that door walked not only justice, but freedom. If you remember anything from my story, let it be this: silence protects no one, not the children, not the mothers, not the families trying to pretend that everything's fine when it isn't. Speaking up takes courage. It might feel like you're lighting your life on fire, but sometimes you need that fire to burn down the lies. The truth is, I didn't rescue my sister alone. I had a notebook, a kind officer, a mother who found her strength, and a community that finally said, no more. And you, maybe you're carrying a story too heavy to hold. Maybe you've kept quiet for years because no one believed you. Or worse, because you stopped believing yourself. I want you to hear this from someone who lived it. You are not alone. There is light waiting on the other side of what you're afraid to say. And one day, like me, you might find that the pieces of your past, the ones that once hurt to touch, can be laid down like stepping stones for someone else. So take that first step. Speak. Write. Reach out. There's a haven for you, too. No matter your age, your voice matters. Whether you're a daughter, a mother, or a grandmother, Never believe that your story is too small, too old, or too broken to help someone else. The truth you carry may be the light someone else is searching for. And sometimes, healing doesn't just save you, it saves generations. Now, it's your turn. Have you ever experienced a moment when speaking up changed everything, or did someone else's courage inspire you to find your own? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read everyone. And if Diane's journey moved you, please subscribe to our channel for more true stories of resilience and redemption. Your voice could be the next story we tell. Thank you for walking this road with us.